Hi, my name is Richard Porter. I direct the International Student and Scholar Services Office. I wish I could be in person presenting this presentation, but I look forward to meeting you at some point during the semester. I'm going to talk to you about a process you're going to be going through. Um, you can think of it as a cultural journey. Some of you will have arrived just recently, and this is your first time in the U.S. Some of you have been here for maybe a semester or a year or longer. But there's a process you're going to go through, and I'm going to use the analogy of a plant. So you are coming from your home country culture, and I want you to think of culture in your home country as like soil that you've been planted in. What's going to happen to you, what has been happening to you, is you have been uprooted from your home country soil, and you are going to be, or you're in the process of being replanted in the cultural soil here in the U.S. I think this is a really helpful analogy first because you're not really aware of your culture when you're living there. It's like the plant, the soil of your culture. You were raised in that culture. I always try to start these presentations with a question about how you can best learn about your home country. And so I don't have anybody to ask, but think about it. What is the best way for you to learn about your home country? It is actually to leave it, as you've done. Because I don't think you really understand or appreciate some of the aspects of your culture until you have an opportunity to live and work and experience another context. But this is a process you're going to be going through, and there will be struggles. So I'm going to help you become aware of this, and I want you to think of this analogy as you live and work and here in the U.S. You're going to go through a process of adaptation and adjustment because you have been uprooted and now you are planted in the soil, the cultural soil here in the U.S. Let's talk briefly about culture first. Culture is a total way of life for a group of people, group habits that can be your home country, it can also be your family. You are all raised in cultural soil. These are patterns or habits consciously or unconsciously absorbed from childhood on up. These are assumptions about the way things should be done and the way people should act. Much of this is very subconscious, but it is very real nonetheless. And it's also subject to change. And it often varies between groups, even within a country. Even within a culture, there are subcultures and there are family cultures. I'm going to talk to you about some of the soil qualities, the different cultural aspects of the U.S. that may be very different from yours. I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I've chosen several different aspects of the U.S. culture. Personal space, community, relationship to and attitudes towards authority, teachers, police, the military, family relations, friendships, and language. Now, many of these different qualities of U.S. culture, the soil, the cultural soil here in the U.S. might be very different from yours, and that's going to impact you in different ways. You're going to have some challenges related to adjustment and expectations. So personal space, you may not be aware of it, but in your home country, you know how close you should stand to somebody when you're talking to them. Maybe that is different between men and women, maybe different between people in authority and their subordinates. But you know, and it's mostly subconscious, but in the US it might be very different. There was an experiment a while back um, where Latin American businessmen and U.S. businessmen were in a social gathering and interacting, and they took pictures every minute or so. And in Latin America, I lived in Mexico for a while. I also lived and worked in Japan for 6 years. But in Latin America, generally, people stand closer to each other when they're speaking to each other. So what could you imagine would happen if you took a picture of a Latin American businessman and a U.S. businessman? Well, what happened was when they put those pictures together, it looked like the Latin American businessman was, in essence, chasing the U.S. businessman around. And they didn't know, they were not aware that the American would step back when the Latin American businessman would step closer, and they proceeded to to move around the room like they were dancing. So this is a good example. Maybe the personal space might be different here in the U.S. than it is in your home country. In the U.S., the way people view as to how they interact with the community may be very different than in your home country. Here, there's a much greater influence and emphasis on the individual achievement, and self-fulfillment. I lived in Japan for 6 years, and in many ways, it's a very much a mirror opposite. The emphasis in Japan in relationship to community is that there's an emphasis on the group and its values, its priorities and goals. That may be very different. Your home country may be much more focused on the group, and that's going to be an adjustment for you here in the U.S. I think that's one of the strongest probably characteristics of American culture, and I think it's becoming in many ways even more of an emphasis. The relationship to authority and attitudes towards authority and tradition. In the U.S., you will encounter in classrooms, a good example of Americans' emphasis on informality. You will have professors ask you to call them by their first name, very informal. You may encounter situations in the classroom that you would be feeling very uncomfortable about, or maybe not even happy about. So when you come to the U.S., you come to into the classroom expecting to be taught by somebody who has experience. They have the PhD. You've paid for that class, and you're in the class, and you begin to realize that's quite different from your home country. Perhaps in the U.S., there's an emphasis on a laxity of towards authority and tradition. So in your home country, you wouldn't maybe ask questions or be asked to participate, but in the U.S., it's a strong emphasis. It may, in fact, irritate you sometimes. You've come to listen to the professor, and there's a student in the class who is very vocal, and they're always asking questions or even challenging the professor. You will find that you will be graded on what is called participation. So the expectation is that you will interact with your professor and with the content. You will not just sit and listen to the professor and take notes. So that's a very strong pattern in the U.S. The informality and a lack of emphasis on authority and tradition, and that might be very different than the cultural soil, the culture of your home country. Family relations. In the U.S., you probably definitely have been exposed to a lot of U.S. media, most likely, and you probably think that American families are just a little bit off if it's accurate how it's portrayed in the media. But in the U.S., there's some different kinds of common family relationships that may be very different from your home country. And family relations are more fluid here. You're going to encounter a lot of people, single mothers and fathers, and less typical American families and more culturally diverse families, mixed race marriages, and even non-traditional uh, marriages. That's going to be something that's challenging to you sometimes, and maybe you will feel comfortable with that. Maybe you will agree or disagree, but nevertheless, this is the cultural soil in the U.S. that you're going to have to interact with. Friendship. Friendship in the U.S. is definitely more casual. You'll be walking across campus and you'll see somebody that was in your class or somebody that you've never even met, perhaps, and they will say, "Hi, how are you?" That might be very strange for you, coming from the country where you're from. And you stopped sort of trying to figure that out, and the person's gone. So, hi, how are you? And this is a stranger, and they're smiling, and you're trying to figure all this out. It's more like they just said hello, and they didn't really want to know, or maybe somebody that was in your class, and you expected them to really be interested in how you were, and you stopped to tell them how your father's not feeling well, and they start to look a little uncomfortable. In the US, something that's unusual in Japan is that there would be true friendships between men and women, and that's a different kind of dynamic. You have to be very careful if you're coming from a culture where when somebody who is the opposite sex smiles and says hello to you and you don't even know who they are, or maybe you've met them in class. Maybe in your home country that might mean more than it means here. So you need to be careful. It's possible that you can have a friendship between a man and a woman here in the US, and that's more acceptable, but it may be very confusing for you. And you may read into some of somebody's being really friendly as something more than friendship, or sending messages that might be very different than they would be in your home country. So you guys in particular, be very careful. When a very attractive woman says hello to you and they're a stranger, or maybe they're in your class, it may not mean that they're that interested in you. Maybe they're just being friendly. So that can be a very different and sort of disconcerting interaction for somebody if they're coming from a culture where that's uncommon. In the US, friendships can be between people of very different ages. I know in Japan, the people who come into a company of the same age those are you're going to be your friends through your time at the company. People above and below age-wise, not that much potential for that intimate kind of relationship to develop, but the barriers between friendships to friendship between people of different ages is much looser here in the US. And so you can have somebody that's a friend or a mentor that's older than you, and that can be very different than maybe it would be in your home country. So language. So many of you studied English. You obviously have achieved a certain level of English competency, some less, some more. Maybe you're from a country whose the second language is English, so it's not very different or challenging in that regard. But I lived in Mexico for a while and studied Spanish. Used as an illustration here. Language is always rooted in culture, and so it's not just words that you understand, it's the cultural context that inform. So when I was first in Mexico, I went into a grocery store and I ordered a Coke, or actually I brought the Coke up to the countertop to pay for it, and the person behind the counter said, "Would you like a bag?" Okay, I had been studying Spanish, and I was in Mexico. It's like, oh, okay, so I understand. What he wants to know is whether I want a bag so that he can put the Coke in the bag. And I said, sure, yeah, I'll have a bag. He popped the cork, the lid off of the Coke, and poured the Coke into a plastic bag, put a straw in it and handed it to me. What the heck just happened? So I walk out of the store with a bag with Coke in it and a straw in the bag, and I think, oh my gosh, what just happened? A simple interaction in the context of culture can mean something very different, and there can be a lot of confusion. Fortunately, I'm walking down the street wondering what happened, and I look across the street, and there's another person walking down the street with a bag with a straw in it. And what I realized was is they were trying to save me from having to come back and return the bottle. So another good example that's really common misunderstandings in the U.S. Is that in Japan, when you say I understand, and in Asia in general, when somebody asks a question, and to be polite, somebody in Asia will say, yes, I understand, right? So in Asia, you smile and you shake your head. And so the American thinks, okay, now we agree. But no, that's not the case. The American might be thinking she agrees with me, but the Asian person is thinking, I understand, but I don't agree. And there's a lot of confusion that can happen, right? So those are some of the many, many different cultural soil patterns in the US that you will be encountering. Now, as a result of all these differences and the adjustment that you're going to go through a transplant shock, right? Remember, you've been uprooted from your home country and you've been replanted in the soil here in the US, the cultural soil in the US. That's going to result in some challenges for you. You're going to be thinking things like this after a while. Oh, I hate American food. I don't fit in here. I never know what's going on. I feel a bit like a child. And that can create some tension and some anger and some subconscious things that are going on. You'll start to miss home, miss those things that are familiar in your home culture, and you'll think that we're all here in the US just a bit off, a bit crazy. And this is what's called culture shock. So let me talk about culture shock. I went through it. Again, I lived in Japan for 6 years. I lived in Latin America for a while. And the culture of Japan is so different than the culture here in the US. Again, emphasizing community rather than individual. And I could go on and on about that. But wherever you're coming from, there's going to be differences. And as a result, you're going to go through a process, and you're going to be interacting with the culture. First, you'll be surprised, maybe excited, but then inevitably in different aspects of your life, you're going to start to struggle a bit. Sometimes there will be conflict, stress, sadness, anger, and sometimes that will be subconscious. Maybe you'll just find yourself angry, and there'll be clashes between you and Americans because of differences, different understandings of how people should act and different patterns. But the goal will be that you go through that curve and come out with connection, through connection and support, and change, positive change, growth. There's no better way to learn and to grow than what you're doing right now. That's leaving your home country and trying to live in another country. And then in the end, I want everybody that's listening to this presentation to find success and confidence as they go through these adjustments. That's going to be very different for some of you. Some of you will not struggle much socially, not much of a dip there. Maybe some of you are coming from a country where your language in your home country is not English or not even your second language. And so there's going to be a bigger adjustment in relationship to language. And then maybe some of you will be far superior or far out ahead of most Americans academically, and that won't be very much of an adjustment or a struggle. but all of you will be going through a struggle. So you're going to need to learn how to adjust here in the U.S. You're going to need, like a plant, you're going to need soil, and you're going to need sunshine, you're going to need water. You need these things to help you grow. Those are analogous to the kind of supports and things you need. More so than Americans in many ways, because you are going through not only the same thing that they go through in relationship to the challenges of just being a student, but you've got the additional challenge of adjusting to the culture. And so it's even more important that you take care of yourself, that you get your needs met because of your additional challenges. So first, physical needs. You can't just stay in the lab all day and not take care of yourself. Because you're going through adjustments and you've got additional challenges, you need to emphasize balance in your life. You need proper rest, diet, exercise, vitamins. You need the warmth of new relationships. You need to be intentional in making connections with other international students and other domestic students and with your professors. You need to renew yourself and your goals and your purposes. You may have unrealistic expectations, and you need to take care of yourself spiritually. To thrive, you need to realize some of these really important factors here, that you're going to go through this adjustment and that you are going through it. Sometimes you'll just feel angry and you won't know why. I want you to think back about this presentation when you're going through that, and realize that you are going to go through an adjustment, and there will be struggles because you're in another culture. There will be some culture shock. There will be some irritation, some clash, some adjustments. And this is actually growth, right? Also, thinking of it positively, you're going to be growing a lot while you're here in the U.S. if you just approach it. And part of it is just being self-aware, realizing that you're going to be going through this adjustment and that you don't want to be too hard on yourself and that you need to take care of yourself. You need to be realistic. I think that's often the expectations you bring, and the unrealistic, many times, expectations that you have as a student, that you're going to graduate in 4 years, you're going to be working hard, and sometimes you need to adjust your expectations and make them more realistic, and that can help you thrive in your new cultural soil here in the U.S. And I would say that keeping a journal is one of the best ways to process your experience and your cultural adjustment here in the U.S. and your experience here in the U.S. It's helped me immeasurably in the different places I've lived, writing out what you're thinking, what happened, what is another way to think about what happened. Journaling is a good way to process your experience here and keep peace of mind and keep yourself on the right track. And I would say one of the more important things that you need to do is to keep your sense of humor. If you're not comfortable laughing about yourself and laughing with people, then it's going to be much harder. I'll tell you a story. When I was in Japan, my wife is Japanese. We met when I was living and working in Japan. And when we were dating, my wife, I went over to her house one day, then my girlfriend, my fiance, and I brought her flowers. Now, in your home country, I think that's probably pretty common around the world. When you're dating somebody, bringing somebody flowers, maybe it's not so common in your home country, but here in the U.S., it's like. And anyway, so I brought the flowers to her at her front door and handed her the flowers, and she laughed at me. I don't think that's culturally appropriate anywhere, right? Maybe. Now, why is she laughing at me, and what's going on here? I found out that unfortunately I had brought her funeral flowers. There's a special type of flower that you bring to people, bring to funerals, bring when somebody passes. And I had made the mistake of bringing her, instead of what was intended, I she laughed. And so you need to be able to laugh at yourself and to not take yourself too seriously, because you'll have many opportunities. You'll have many opportunities to laugh at yourself, and you need to not take yourself so seriously and realize you're going through this process. So you're going to need to go through a process of facing that there's change that's going to be occurring. This is positive or negative, but I think it can be very positive. Again, this is a tremendous growth opportunity for you here in the U.S. So just remember, change will happen, give and take. I hope that that we benefit, and I know that there's much that we can gain through our interaction with you and understanding your culture. And we're so happy and so grateful that you've come to Texas Tech. But this is your opportunity to learn about your home country and take some of the good that you can gain here and the different ways of interaction that may be something that you can take in and would help you be a more well-rounded person and grow in many ways that you could not have if you had stayed in your home country. Remember that change can be positive or negative, and it just really depends on the attitude that you take. And I want you to think in terms of this as an opportunity to grow. And if you do that, and if you have that attitude, it's going to be a positive experience and one opportunity for you to grow in ways that you never could have if you hadn't come to the U.S. I'd like to challenge you. So I know when I lived in Japan, there were things that I didn't really like about the culture sometimes, but I'm a much better person for having lived and worked in Japan, because the different way that they look at the world, there are some advantages to that. And so there's a challenge that I have for you. Be committed to the truth. This is your opportunity to take what's best about American culture and throw away the rest, to learn from different perspectives and take in what is good. So I challenge you to just take the best here. And there's a lot of habits that we have here in the U.S. that I don't agree with, that I hope you don't bring back to your home country. But if you're committed to the truth and you think, what can I take that's the best from both cultures, from my home country and from the U.S., leave the rest. So I challenge you to take advantage of this opportunity in that way. And then, this is your opportunity to become intercultural, because that's going to be very, very advantageous. The mental flexibility that you gain here will help you in your future career as you interact with people from all over the world, perhaps, even when you go back, or if you choose to stay here in the U.S. Becoming intercultural and gaining cultural competencies is a very, very valuable skill in the world that we live in today. So in conclusion, I want you to remember this analogy. You're going to be going through a cultural journey, you're going to be struggling, and as you go through that, be self-aware and remember, don't be too hard on yourself. Remember that you've been uprooted from your home country's culture and you've been replanted in the U.S. culture. This will help you sort of understand why it is that sometimes you're just down, or you're angry, or you're struggling. Remember this analogy. As you grow, use your experience to break the walls and limitations of your cultural pod. We hope that we can learn a lot from you. You're highly valued here on the campus. Our students from West Texas need your perspective on the world. And it's an opportunity for you to grow in that way and help us grow as well. We need to, in this world that we live in now, we need to see these different ways of experiencing and interacting with the world as an opportunity to develop a peaceful intercultural garden, so to speak. So I'll leave you with that thought. Be a peacemaker, be a person that's open to growth and different perspectives, and please, please share with us your culture, because we value your presence here highly. And I wish I could be in person presenting this session, but hope you find this useful, and I look forward to meeting you in person. We're over at the International Cultural Center, and I hope that next semester we won't have to be physically spacing and all that, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Take care.